You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Well, good morning, America. Welcome to Connecting the Dots. My name is Dan Happel, and where is the year going? It's already May 7th, 2019, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful day out here in southern Arizona, and I am hoping that we have listeners today that are going to get a program that I've had quite a few requests for, and that is a return of two guests that we've had on previously who are national security experts, and that is Mary Fanning and Alan Jones, and they are going to be talking about a program under Obama called The Hammer, and The Hammer is a secret surveillance group and supercomputer program put together to really spy on the Trump presidency when he was just a candidate, when he was just running, and also to spy on average Americans around the country. This is straight out of the KGB. This is straight out of 1984. It's just unbelievable. And, of course, Mary and Alan have been on our show before to Port Canaveral about the Clinton administration and some of the things that were done during, let's say the Clinton State Department scandals, some of the things that happened during their tenure. And today we're going to be talking about the Hammer, and there is a whistleblower by the name of Dennis Montgomery who has brought all this information forward that this was going on with Clapper and Mueller and with all the people involved in the so-called investigation of President Trump, and how all these things were being done clandestinely and illegally before the Trump presidency. This has been going on for some time. And I can tell our listeners, and I think we all know this, the reason they hate Trump is because he is an America first, a nationalist. He believes in really American system of government, our constitutional republic. He believes that we should be a sovereign nation, and the people who are out there literally who have taken over our government and who control the Democrat and a significant amount of the Republican Party are internationalists, they're globalists, they are progressive socialists, and they believe that the United States should no longer exist as a sovereign entity, that we should be part of their New World Order, and that we should live under a Marxist, socialist, communist, we can call it whatever we want, system of government that is controlled by a handful of people, and that, of course, is cradle to grave, and they believe that that's in our best interest, and they believe that's in our national interest. So with that, Mary and Alan, welcome to the program. Mary, first of all, I have to say that you are a special friend of mine for two reasons. Because your brother Bob was a very, very special friend of mine. Bob passed away on Christmas Eve this last year, and I have to tell you that next week we've got a special program we're doing on wolves with Chance Gowan and Dr. Valerius Geist, and it's going to be dedicated to your brother Bob, because Bob fought so hard to try to expose what was going on in the Northwest. And all I can say is I have a special place in my heart for Bob Fanning, and he will be with me for the rest of my life as well. So, Mary, welcome to the program, and give a little introduction on your own about your work and some of the organizations you work with, and then we'll get Alan on to do the same.
Dan, it's so very nice to be with you. You are an exceptional man, and you and Bob were such good friends. So thank you so much for mentioning him. The world, particularly the United States, could really use him these days. Our work, Alan and I do national security investigations, and much of our work can be found at the Center for Security Policy.org, but also we've written for Breitbart and Communities Digital News, which had been the Washington Times Communities, and LifeSet, Breitbart, several different publications, including our own website, the AmericanReport.org and 1776channel.com. So, as you mentioned, yes, we have extensively covered Port Canaveral and the Jafars and the Club K. In fact, we broke those stories. But today we're here to talk about the whistleblower tapes and the whole whistleblower tape series that showed that Trump was wiretapped, quote, a zillion times by the Hammer, which was Brennan and Clapper's secret surveillance system. The background to this is, initially, the whistleblower tapes were released several years prior to Donald Trump being elected or even running for office. But the tapes were initially released by Judge D. Murray Snow in a Maricopa County court case. At that time, we transcribed the tapes and had posted them and did bullet points of information, and the tapes themselves were shocking. At the time, Mike Zullo was on the stand, and he did not have an attorney at that point, and he was refusing to testify, and then he did testify. One should understand that the whistleblower tape came from Mike Zullo recording those who are speaking on those audio tapes, and they were being recorded unbeknownst to them. So understand that the people who are speaking on the whistleblower tapes did not know that they were being recorded. So understanding at that point in time Mike Zullo testifying in Judge D. Murray Snow's court and being made to hand over those recordings, at the same time, Dennis Montgomery, who had been the NSA, the CIA contractor, who then became a whistleblower, he saw what was coming, and he engaged Larry Klayman as his attorney. Subsequently, Mike Zullo did as well. But Klayman and Montgomery then went to the FBI, to James Comey's FBI, and they received an immunity agreement in exchange for handing over the tapes. Now, the tapes, or the documentation that they handed over, were 600 million pages of documents. And one wonders, what does 600 million pages of documents look like when you're handing it over to the corporate counsel, James Baker, for the FBI. Well, Dennis Montgomery describes that those documents, placed one upon the other, measured 30 miles high. So people understand that these are an enormous cache of documents. But what the documents showed was that Brennan and Clapper, and Brennan working, this was even before John Brennan was the head of the CIA, the director of the CIA. James Clapper at DNI, the director of National Intelligence. This surveillance system was illegally surveilling Supreme Court justices, particularly John Roberts, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, FISA. So people understand that the FISA court, remember all the FISA warrants that were given out to Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and those going after Donald Trump. Also, 156 Article 3 judges were also under surveillance. Members of Congress, ordinary Americans, they were collecting all their information, their phone calls, their bank accounts, what they were Googling, just all sorts of information on, the ordinary Americans, millions of ordinary Americans. So these tapes prove that our intelligence, our entire intelligence structure was illegally surveilling not just the campaign of Donald Trump, but all sorts of Americans and judges. This is disturbing because, as you said, this is something that we would imagine to be the Stasi or the Nazis. This is making the United States of America into a police state, a communist or Nazi police state. So at that point, when Dennis Montgomery, when he goes to the FBI and he receives immunity agreement for testimony and to also hand over the documents, he is taken by James Baker and a man named Barnett and another named Giardina, who were known as James Comey's two top guys. They take Dennis Montgomery into a secure skiff, and under oath, he testifies for 3 hours. So he goes over the information and what he's been doing for Brennan and Clapper and a secure skiff for James Comey's FBI. This is important because Giardina, Baker, Comey, all these same people are those who became involved not only in the Russia investigation, but making sure that Robert Mueller, who is James Comey's longtime friend, they're making sure that these people are going into a Russian collusion investigation to further smear Donald Trump. So these people, this is no different than a coup. This is a silent coup d'etat, but is a coup nonetheless. These people have committed treason and sedition, and we do not work this way in this country.
Mary, I thank you. I wanted to mention the fact that, President Trump, or President Obama, pardon me for that, President Obama swore an oath to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I mean, this is not a little mistake, a little lightweight thing. I mean, if he had actually sworn an oath to uphold and protect and defend Stalinist ideology and Mao ideology and sworn that on a Quran, then I would understand him being able to get away with this kind of nonsense. But this is treason at the very highest level of government. It's treason in a way that just absolutely cannot be ignored.
If it's ignored, Dan, I agree with you. If it is ignored, there is no rule of law in this country. They have just reverse engineered our Constitution if these actions are ignored. We also had William Binney, the former NSA technical director. He came out and told that this sort of surveillance was taking place, as well as a former CIA State Department official, Larry Johnson. At the same point in time, they came forward and said that this illegal surveillance was taking place. Then, if you remember, when James Clapper, one wonders what happened with James Clapper. People in the military particularly wonder, from knowing James Clapper previously, that what made him go so wrong? What made him do such a thing? Those who know John Brennan know his history. John Brennan was a known communist. He supported Gus Hall for President of the United States, a communist candidate, to be the president of this country. And it's stunning to think that John Brennan then became the director of the CIA when those were his inclinations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Mary, Brennan had shown, he had exhibited, there's a lot of writing about Brennan, and by people who were involved intimately in the CIA. And almost to a person, they questioned how he even got into the positions he did, because he had no qualifications for most of those positions.
Well, under Barack Obama, apparently he did. In fact, if you remember, Barack Obama was going to put John Brennan up for CIA director immediately, and that was not going to fly, so he pulled back that nomination, which is interesting because he knew that people knew about John Brennan. Part of the information that's on the audio tapes for the whistleblower tapes is that John Brennan brought the idea of creating this monstrous surveillance system to Vice President Cheney at the time. And Cheney fired Brennan on the spot, just for suggesting it. Or at least that's what we're told in the whistleblower tape.
Wow. Well, that's great knowledge. I kind of wondered how this new data center outside of Salt Lake, how that would figure into the size of this literally international, but certainly national investigation into private citizens and into candidates and Supreme Court justices. Obviously, that was something that happened during the Obama administration as well.
Well, remember that facility is, what you see above ground is one thing, but it goes 12 stories below ground.
Yeah, it's amazing. Absolutely
that
amazing.
Is an enormous facility. But people can go back and think about, remember when we found out that so this system doesn't just surveil you, it also has exploits that they can place things on your computer. And they speak to that they put on child pornography, or in the case of Cheryl Atkinson, there were classified documents that were put on her system, and she knew that something was happening with her computer at home because she saw that it turned on by itself in the nighttime. and she saw that strange things were happening. So she got a friend who had been in the CIA and had experience with computers to come and see what was taking place on her computer. And they told her not only was she under this electronic surveillance, but that they had placed classified documents on her computer, so she could have been arrested and put in prison, for many years. If you remember James Risen at Fox News, he was found that he was under surveillance, but not only was he under surveillance, so too were his parents. And so when they don't like someone, or if they consider them their political enemy, or even that they have information that could expose them, or really for various and sundry reasons, anything that they care to do, they can simply frame you. So
yeah, it's a frightening thought, but you're absolutely right. And 5G is going to make this even worse.
Yeah, not to mention the health consequences of 5G.
Right. Right.
So when they're not getting you in one direction, they're getting you in the other. Your health and your freedom. So it's.
Well, Mary, I have to remind our listeners, this is something I bring up time and time again. One of the basic premises, one of the basic, let's say, philosophies of Agenda 21 is the elimination of about 93% of our population, bringing the human population, a controllable human population, under 1 billion people, and make sure they are people who can be controlled. So they've got a lot of people to get rid of, and frankly, all this just fits together like a glove, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Somehow these elites think that the rest of us are sucking up their oxygen on their planet. And I'm not sure who appointed them God, as we used to hear. These people have, as some of the information about them has been exposed over time, and who they are and what their belief systems are, they don't just stand with the likes of Stalin and Hitler. As you remember, Alinsky and this whole Alinsky method, his book was dedicated to Lucifer. And there's a reason that these people believe in the rules for radicals and how to take down this country via the Saul Alinsky method. They are also, as has been exposed time and again, they believe in this Luciferian method.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, Alan, I know you're on the call as well, and I don't want to leave you out of this conversation because you've contributed a tremendous amount of effort and work into this, let's say, expose. Tell our listeners a little about yourself, and then I'd like to hear your opinion of some of these things.
Well, thank you for bringing us on the program again. It's always a pleasure to be able to share our work with your guests. So, Mary and I have been working together as an investigative journalism team. We both independently had been conducting our own national security and investigative work independently before we began collaborating. So we just built on those strengths. I think she already listed many of the publications where our work has appeared. And this is an ongoing endeavor. And every day there's new discoveries and more concern about exactly how precarious the situation our country has found itself in. It would be really difficult to even expound on all that and explain to your listeners exactly how much trouble we're in. But I wanted to stay focused on the surveillance story, which is the topic for today. And I want to expand on what Mary was saying about this becoming a police state. And if you look at history, how 20th century tyrannies work, surveillance is a major component of the control that is exerted over a population. And whether you're talking about the Nazis or whether you're talking about the communists, such as the Stasi, which was a secret police in East Germany, or the KGB, which acted as, they conducted internal security in the Soviet Union and the Soviet satellite states, as well as foreign intelligence. But for them, information is the means of control over the populace. And the technology has changed, but the basic concept hasn't. And the Stasi had a massive headquarters in East Germany, and they had just tons of file cabinets with files on everyone. And it became where they would basically coerce or pay or otherwise persuade people to spy on those that were close to them. And it got to the point where adult members of a family were careful not to discuss anything in front of their children, because the children were then approached by the authorities through the public school to try to get information about the political activities of the parents or what they were involved in. And this even goes on today in places like Venezuela. So it could be as simple as getting children to talk and then write down their information in a notebook and then put it in a file cabinet and hold it there for later. And so the concept is to collect as much information as possible that it can then be quickly retrieved and used against a certain individual or individuals to then further the agenda of the regime or of the tyranny. And so, you begin with little notebooks and collecting information from friends and neighbors and children, etc. Then, in Germany, they had rudimentary recording systems. They were making recordings of people wiretapping. That's where the word wiretapping came from, where they actually would connect wires and to patch them into the phone system and then collect all that information. Now, Dennis Montgomery, who is the whistleblower who was at the center of this controversy about the surveillance system allegedly created during the expanded under the Obama administration and run by James Clapper and John Brennan. Mr. Montgomery uses the word leverage to describe how they use the information. So they collect massive amounts of data, and they're not using notebooks and old analog tape recorders anymore. They're using digital capability to hack into people's computers and their handheld devices like iPhones and Android phones to gather all this information, and it's filed away and can be recalled at any time to use as leverage. Now, who would they want leverage over? Well, obviously people who have certain levers of power within the government, within the three branches of government. So, therefore, they would want to spy on the judiciary, members who are involved in judges working in the courts, especially Article 3 judges, federal appeals courts, etc. They would want to spy on members of Congress. That's another branch, because if you can get leverage over somebody before they have an important vote, whether the vote is on a piece of legislation or the vote is something as profound as going to war, they could potentially own that member of Congress with the right information. And if it's acquired illegally, so be it. The ends justify the means, and the ends is complete and absolute power. Members of the business community could be targeted as well. Executives. It could be used for all sorts of espionage, industrial espionage, all sorts of things. But this is really, it can get out of control, and apparently it has, because there's so many things that happen that people were scratching their heads. You know, why did this or that person make this decision? Why did they make the call that they did? Well, with that kind of leverage and that kind of control, anything's possible. You could blackmail members of the military. People working at the
Alan, I hate to interrupt, but we have a commercial break coming up, but keep that thought and we will pick it up on the other side of the break. Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and today my very, very special guests on the program are Mary Fanning and Alan Jones. And Alan was just talking about how this surveillance state has really turned into something that's nightmarish in proportion, and we are literally on the very verge of losing our country. And Alan, I'm sorry I had to interrupt you for the break, but go ahead and continue with your thoughts on that.
Well, recently, observers have been describing the Russian Federation as basically an intelligence state. It's run by former KGB officials who have, you know, been able to enrich themselves with prime positions within the Putin regime. Well, I don't really know how you would differentiate that kind of an intelligence police state from what we're looking at if everything that these tapes reveal is true, because you're looking at basically absolute power from an intelligence services that have been given tremendous technological powers that were supposed to be used to protect the country against terrorists, foreign adversaries, and the like, but instead was turned on the American people to empower those who were trusted with this sort of tremendous power and technology. And they appear to be acting like the KGB would, or acting like the FSB and Putin's inner circle, and where there's really no limits to their power, and they appear to be using information to chip away at the separation of powers. Because if you can use surveillance as leverage over the three branches of government, at that point you don't have a country. So what makes us any different than any sort of third world dictatorship or some sort of super state tyranny like Russia?
Yeah, Alan, and one of the things that I think you're getting at, and I certainly see it, is that this is something that's been happening over a period of time. I mean, people talk about the tragedy of 9/11. I think the biggest tragedy of 9/11 is the Patriot Act, because under this surveillance state that was given pretty much free rein over our country, we lost so many of our constitutionally guaranteed protections. And so it isn't like, you know, George W. Bush was immune from this. It's all been part of a system that's been building for a long, long time. And frankly, we need to stop this. We need to turn this ship around. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
This is an ongoing conversation. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Dennis Montgomery. He's got a kind of an interesting background, and he was actually, wasn't he involved with software in systems design, and that's how he got initially involved with CIA and the FBI and these groups, is because he was actually working on some of the software design?
Yes, he was. If you remember, he was ended up in a lawsuit with E-Trepid, and at that point, he was sued, and they tried to destroy his reputation, and they put out stories with the New York Times about him. As soon as they finished destroying his reputation, they hired him right back. And so they simply wanted to make sure that should he ever talk, that his reputation had been destroyed and that no one would believe him. He is still in court suing James Risen for the book that he wrote about him. And that continues. He went back to court with Larry Klayman, and Judge Leon put that off, and they didn't get the decision they wanted initially, but that has yet to be decided. Let me go back to one thing that we were talking about. Is any of those who have read Richard Evans' three-book series, The Coming of the Third Reich in Power, needs to understand that the fact that Justice Roberts was being, wiretapped, was being under surveillance by this hammer, it's important to understand that in the context of Obamacare. When the Nazis came to power, the first thing they did was take over the nation's health care system. And so it's important to understand that here is Barack Obama utilizing the hammer against the American people and then taking over all of their health care records. Are you aware that all doctors were paid $18,000 each to hand over our health care records?
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And the other amazing thing about that is how Justice Roberts upheld Obamacare as a legitimate tax. And it's unbelievable, because what you're telling me is that it was he was colluded into probably doing that.
Yes, and it's important to understand, too, that Justice Roberts has oversight over the FISA court. And beyond which, remember the point, if anyone has read Justice Roberts' opinion on Obamacare, the entire opinion leads to the point that it is unconstitutional and illegal. And then at the very end of that opinion, he simply flips and goes and then supports Obamacare. That's not so. It looked as though, in fact, that leverage was in play, and that he changed his opinion and went along with putting the idea that you put the American people's health care under the government, and that the government has the final say-so on what's going to happen to you with your health care, that you have to appeal to the government if you're going to get surgery or not surgery. And I'm sure that brings to mind for many people when they were having these town hall meetings, and someone spoke to Barack Obama, and they said, well, my mother's in great shape, and she's looking to have a surgery, but she's 80 years old, and should she, will this affect her getting her surgery? And he said, well, maybe she should just take a pill. So you're now having the government decide whether you should have surgery or not. It's no longer the sacred, under the sacred oath of your physician, and that sacred relationship between patients and physicians. Now you've got the government put in place by Obamacare, who's the final arbiter of your health. That is really important, because that takes control of all the people in this country, not just via blackmail, but also that they now get to tell you what you're allowed to have under your health care policies.
Well, and Mary, I'm sure you remember this. One of Obama's architects of the Obamacare system even stated publicly that he thought that if you reached the age of 75 at that point, you'd ended your useful purpose on Earth, and therefore, after 75, you may not be considered for health care.
Yes, and he said that the American people were a bunch of Homer Simpsons, just generally calling the American people idiots that they could do with whatever. But I think in context of that, one should consider, you might remember that in the Obama administration with Rahm Emanuel, the book that they were handing out to everyone was Animal Spirits. And so it's important to understand that they view us as their herd, that they view us as the animals on their farm.
Isn't this just amazing? I mean, who would have ever dreamed that we would be having this conversation? And the thing is, Mary and Alan, this is a conversation we should have been having about 20 years ago about what we should guard ourselves against, and now we're talking about it in retrospect. Well, we're at the abyss at this point. And fortunately, I truly believe it was the hand of God that Donald Trump won and that we have another opportunity. But people, this is not a time to waste this final opportunity. If they take us over the cliff, it will be, I can't even imagine how long before we come back for our freedom, because truly, if the lights go out here, they go out everywhere. If they get their way, and if you're watching the opposition, the Communist Democrat Party, these people are simply like whirling dervishes. They're so out of control that this is going to be unwound, that there's an opportunity that the people are going to take back control of their country. And God help us if we don't. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the thing that's so frightening about this whole prospect is that it's happened so quickly, and yet the average American had no idea. I mean, I'm well read and very involved and have been for a long time. And Mary, I have to admit, I had no idea how deep the deep state was until we started seeing what's happening under President Trump. I mean, it's so much worse than I dreamed, and believe me, I dreamed that it was pretty bad. Right, they've come out of the closet at this point, and so for the first time we get a look at, all these people of sterling character, James Comey, Robert Mueller. These people are anything but people of sterling character. In fact, if you remember, Colleen Rowley, the FBI agent, called them out that they were planning the Patriot Act at John Ashcroft's bedside. And the people that were at that bedside, it is worth noting, it is worth remembering, that the people who were standing with John Ashcroft when the pretense of him not signing the Patriot Act were Robert Mueller, James Comey, and the third person, you should be very aware, was Christopher Wray. Christopher Wray, our sitting director of the FBI right now. Wow, that's amazing. You folks are incredible. I have to say, Mary, you and Alan are absolutely incredible how deep you dig and how much information you have. And I want to just let you guys run with all that, because there's all these intricate connections that go so deep into our spy agencies, so deep into our intelligence agencies, and this is so convoluted. I mean, that's the only thing I can call it, is convoluted, because they have taken such total control, and they have such bad actors in positions of really destroying this country. Oh, absolutely. Another thing that I think is worth considering is, Dan, you mentioned the Patriot Act. It's so important that truly took away our liberties, our constitutional rights. Remember at that point in time, as the Patriot Act went through, that the head of the Department of Homeland Security was none other than Michael Chertoff. Why is that important? Because Michael Chertoff
owns all those machines at the airport where they put their hands all over us, where they're touching children. You know, we teach children safe touch, don't let people touch you. Yet at the airport now they've got people putting their hands all over them. And the same is true of, you know, you've got people with burqas who get great reverence as they go through, but Granny in diapers is pulled into a room and humiliated and gone through her underwear. This is out of control. Those machines are against everything that we believe in. How dare they put their hands on us? How dare the head of the Department of Homeland Security own those machines?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Let's continue to kind of weave this web. Mary, you and Alan, weave this web and show our listeners how so much of this is all so totally interconnected. Please do that.
It is very interconnected, and let me go back to one of the first pieces that Alan and I did together. And the piece is, and it's on both of our websites, as I said, theamericanreport.org and 1776channel.com. That piece is the clues to Barack Obama's mysterious ID. And if you remember, you know, none of us could get his birth certificate, and the one that he produced is not even a hard document. It was put together on a computer, layered on a computer. That has been proven. And of course, you know, in true Stasi fashion, anyone who is mentioning his birth certificate is, of course, a birther, or those who actually understand is actually a constitutionalist. Barack Obama's background, as we show in that piece, his father or his mentor is Frank Marshall Davis. It's worth remembering that Frank Marshall Davis, when asked who were the two men, who were the people he most admired, and he said it was two men that he most admired: Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Now, can you imagine that this country put in office a man whose mentor most admired Hitler and Stalin? Stalin, a communist, the Communist Party that's responsible for the deaths of 100 million people, or Hitler, who was the things he was doing in those camps to people. And so here is the man who gets into the Oval Office that his mentor most admires Hitler and Stalin. Not only that, we find, and we show in that piece, the people who put together Barack Obama's campaign and his campaign artwork and were in fact the next generation, the red diaper babies that were connected to the Soviet Silver Master spies. These were Soviet spies who were working with the Rosenbergs to take our nuclear secrets. These are the children of who were working on Barack Obama's campaign. You know, so that there was far more than just Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn, two communist revolutionaries of the weathermen, the weather underground. And the people that he has surrounded him with are America haters, communist lovers, and radical psychopaths, according to Larry Gratwald, the FBI agent who had infiltrated them. But so all these people who are in Barack Obama's orbit are anti-American, are pro-communist. These are people who do not share our values. They do not believe in our Constitution. So we expose that, and we expose it using the FBI documents. In fact, when we did that paper, and we were able to pull all the information from the FBI vault, and actually I got a nice email from Keith Ellison, communist out of Minnesota. Now they're Attorney General. Keith Ellison, another fellow, Islamo-communist. After we did that paper, the administration took down the ability to do a word search. So if you were looking at a document that was 100 pages long, you could no longer do a word search for one word. You had to read every word of the 100-page document. So that was interesting as we started putting together Barack Obama's connections to Soviet silver master spies and to communist revolutionaries. And I don't think people should forget that's who he was and what he was putting in place in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I you mentioned Frank Marshall Davis, but I certainly don't know how many people who have seen Frank Marshall Davis's picture and Barack Obama's mother's picture that miss the point. There certainly looks to be an awful lot of genetic connection on both sides of that relationship. And Frank Marshall Davis, I know, was a compatriot and a friend of Barack Obama's grandfather, who also was connected with the CIA. Do you have anything with that?
Yes, we do. Barack Obama's grandfather, Stanley Dunham, very interesting. He also came out of Kansas. Stanley Dunham worked at the Boeing factory. His wife was the night supervisor. And anyone who understands the history of World War II understands that that's exactly where the records to the B-52 were stolen from.
It was actually the B-29. It was a predecessor
the B-29.
of the B-52.
Thank you, Alan. It was a B-29. So it's interesting that the Frank Marshall Davis and the Dunhams come out of the same place. Another piece to that study that we did, the clues to Barack Obama's mysterious ID, are his connections to Spied. And Dan, you mentioned the similarity of Barack to Frank Marshall Davis. There's, also a great similarity between Barack and Spied, the founder of Spied. Now, Spied was it's kind of an Islamic Sufism, mysticism, and it came out of Indonesia. His mother was a member of Spied, as was, interestingly, as was Loretta Fuddy, the woman who supplied his birth certificate and then went down in that plane accident in Hawaii. But also, the other person in his realm, Victor Margolin, was also one of the top members of Spied, and he is the son, Victor Margolin, of a Soviet silver master. Spied had many intelligence operatives, including many Nazis, that had joined it in Indonesia, where Barack Obama grew up. And so that can account for his Islamic leanings, shall we say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's see. It's pretty fascinating, Mary, because I know you and Alan have done the enormous amount of research into the backgrounds of that whole family, the whole relationship, the social connections, all that. And you've come to the conclusion that this is something that was Barack Obama's being president was pre-planned. It was orchestrated from the highest levels that he would be groomed to be the President of the United States, and that he would be a transition president who would really bring us into the New World Order. Now, I'm making that statement, but I know in conversations with you, I know that you've come to very much that same conclusion. Tell me, do you see that the way I do, that the deep state and all this is something that has been the culmination of a whole process that is bringing the United States into the New World Order and destroying our constitutional republic?
Absolutely. because you understand, Dan, I couldn't agree more with that. You have to understand that Barack Obama goes to George Soros and Maurice Strong of Agenda 2130, because they didn't implement it quite as fast as they had hoped. But George Soros is an interesting character and has close connections to Barack Obama, but his close connections to the deep state and to the Rothschilds, etc. I believe, so George Soros was a Nazi sympathizer who told in his youth that he was turning in Jewish people. His family was very anti-Semitic. They were
Mary, I don't want to interrupt, but I've got to, because this we are coming into a break, and I want you to be able to really flesh this out without an interruption. So let's pick this up on the other side.
The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
A mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and today I have two very, very special guests on my radio show. Mary Fanning, who is I think one of the sharpest individuals I've ever spoken with. She is an amazing researcher. And Alan Jones, who is the absolutely one of the best investigative reporters in the country. And these folks have done an enormous amount of work for the American people to expose really what's behind the deep state. And our radio program today is about a project called The Hammer, which was really a surveillance society program initiated under President Barack Obama and some of the implications of that. Before we get back into the program, though, I have a new sponsor, and we're in the process of putting together the actual advertisement right now. But I have a new sponsor by the name of 7K Metals, and they are just an amazing company. And I really, are you prepared for the upcoming economic collapse and the currency reset? Because right now the stock market is setting at historic highs, but how much longer can this last? The 2008 banking crisis nearly brought down the whole world financial system and only managed to kick the can down the road a few years by saddling the American taxpayers with trillions in additional debt. That was 11 years ago, and national personal debt levels are much worse today pushing us to the point where the dollar is nearly worthless. Gold and silver has been the only true money for thousands of years and may be the only asset class left standing when the inevitable global financial collapse happens. You buy insurance for your car, home, and life to prepare for life's mishaps. Why not purchase some insurance for the inevitable world financial meltdown, especially if that insurance is better than money in the bank and available at wholesale prices. This is a way that you can support connecting the dots and ensure your financial survival by joining me at danhappel.com and click on the 7K Metals icon to learn more about a program that could be the best financial insurance policy in America. This is a group that's very similar to the concept of Costco or Sam's Club. It is a wholesale buying group, and this is a great opportunity if you are thinking about using precious metals as an insurance policy. This is an excellent opportunity to do it in a way that you can purchase this material at wholesale, and at the same time that you can help our Connecting the Dots radio program with satellite uplinks and opportunities to expand this programming to literally much more worldwide venues. So with that, Mary, I'm sorry I had to throw that little plug-in for 7 Metals, but this is an amazing group, and I'm really tickled with their sponsorship. And I didn't want to interrupt what you were saying, but boy, this all fits together because the deep state, one of the things they want to do with the deep state is destroy our ability as individuals to buy and sell. They want us under their total, absolute digital control, and that's one of the things they have planned. So anyway, you go ahead and finish your thoughts. I want to interrupt you because I kind of wanted you to be, boy, you were on a run there, I could tell, and I want to make sure that you get a chance to say everything that's on your mind.
Well, they do want us under their control, and they are the deep state, and those like Robert Mueller are part of it, and they are not only stealing our country and our currency, but our natural resources. Dennis Montgomery told, and this is very important, that Robert Mueller's FBI is who provided the computers for the Hammer, the illegal surveillance system that Brennan and Clapper were running. So that's very important because Dennis Montgomery went on to tell that since 2001, they had the Bundys under surveillance because they were looking to take their property because Barack Obama and Harry Reid had already sold it to the Chinese because of the uranium deposits on it. So they set out with the intent of taking the Bundy family down and taking their ranch away from them. So it wasn't about grazing rights, it was because they wanted their property. And so if this is who the deep state are, and this is what they are, and it is, then they are looking to take all the natural resources, and just like Hillary sold our uranium to Russia, these people think that they can do whatever they want, and they're no longer bound by the rule of law. So think about that the man who handed over the computers to create this system is then put in charge of the Russia collusion investigation, which was ludicrous from the beginning. I mean, anyone with an iota of common sense understands that the fact that we're investigating Donald Trump while Hillary Clinton is selling 22% of a national security resource key to having any nuclear weapons or nuclear power plants, and that Robert Mueller himself delivered the sample of that uranium to Moscow. So while all those things have taken place, we're going to go after Donald Trump for having Russian collusion. It's ludicrous. These people are so deep up to their neck and treason and sedition And these are the ones who are working with Putin. These are the people who are selling our uranium. These are the people who are handing off our ports and our national security. And
Mary, I want you to explain that thing about Mueller actually taking the sample of the uranium to Russia. I read that and I didn't fully understand it. I know you've done the research. Tell us about it.
Well, it was in WikiLeaks, and so and WikiLeaks has been very important because Robert Mueller, Hillary perpetrated the sale of our uranium. Now, understand this: selling a national security asset like that means that should we need nuclear weapons or our Trident submarines have nuclear materials on them. So selling our uranium to an adversary is incredibly, as Barack Obama likes to say, boneheaded.
Yeah, very, very.
That Robert Mueller delivered the sample to Moscow, that he flew into Moscow to give them the sample, is stunning. And then he has the temerity to be in charge of the investigation of Donald Trump.
Well, this is something that you've mentioned a number of times to me, and that is that these folks right now who have done all these things are literally scared to death that all this is being exposed and that President Trump is going to expose them. I know there's conversation out there, I've certainly heard it, about all the indictments that are out there in the wings ready to be served against so many of these public officials elected and appointed who are part of this whole deep state system. But maybe tell our listeners a little bit about how all roads lead to Rome, as it were, how all this stuff is so interconnected and tied together. And you're right. I mean, there literally is so much out there that if it gets exposed to the American people, Katie, bar the doors.
Yeah, these people are very afraid that what they have done will be exposed, and if it is, and if the rule of law stands, they will hang. There is no question that this is treason. And so, not only are they taking away our constitutional rights to privacy, and remember, those rights to privacy, the penumbra of rights to privacy, were cited under even Roe versus Wade, that the rights to privacy are inherent in our Constitution. So even under Roe versus Wade, do they talk about our rights to privacy. So you cannot be making this a surveillance state. And so it's not just that they surveilled us, not that they surveilled people and then we're using that documentation to stick the IRS on them, or using it for leverage to make them vote for Obamacare, or that everyone in Congress is too afraid to speak up because they are being blackmailed, or they know they're under surveillance. And I'm sure people remember when John Brennan came before Congress for a hearing to be the director of the CIA, Dianne Feinstein, far left, pro-China, China spy in her office for 20-some-odd years, was questioning John Brennan about the surveillance. Was he spying on her computers? Was he spying on her office? So the whole thing is so wrong-headed that those of us who have studied, Dan, like you, God knows the information that you've studied over time. What happens when you go into societies where this sort of thing exists, you see in East Germany, for years when we go to East Germany, and I I'd see the people there, and I'd compare them, because we'd get together with people from both for business reasons, East Germany and West Germany. And the difference was the dead-eyed look that all those from East Germany, even after the wall had come down, they just had I used to laugh with my husband that it took until, 12 hours of drinking before one of them could crack a smile. When you're being spied upon and you no longer have trust in anything, you live in a state where everyone is basically paranoid. When your children are reporting on you. So we cannot let this happen in America. And we have one last chance, but they're well on their way. And this is something that only the American people, I've said, no one is coming to help us. We are the people that we have been waiting for. If we don't stand up, just as we've been told, we will lose our freedom.
I want to add something.
Alan, I want you to come in on this conversation too, please.
Yes, I want to add on something that you both brought up, is that the deep state's very afraid of this information coming out because the consequences for them are going to be very serious. But I think also the media, and I'm talking about the mainstream media, is extremely afraid of this information coming out because it's really unclear at this point where the deep state ends and where these big media operations like CNN and MSNBC begin. You look at who they bring in as on television constantly is John Brennan and James Clapper. And how many times did we hear them repeat over and over again for the last 2 years? Russia collusion, Trump is a Russian agent, Russia collusion. I mean, you can go on YouTube and listen to videos put together, spliced together, of like 5 minutes of that. Well, what else have they been saying? There was no illegal spying on Trump. Trump was never wiretapped. They didn't listen to Trump's phone calls. They never spied on Trump. On and on and on and on. Yet, they're not talking about Dennis Montgomery. This story really could destroy the credibility of the media, which is already sort of like a wounded animal after pushing a Russia collusion hoax for 2 years and then continuing on with it. Nancy Pelosi's continuing on with it. I don't know that they can really survive something like this information coming out because it goes so deep. I mean, the hammer and the surveillance system could be used to perpetuate and cover up all sorts of scandals within the Obama administration. This surveillance has been done on Americans, including people within the 3 branches of government. Who has that been shared with? Has any of this data been collected using this illegal surveillance system and been shared with foreign countries and the intelligence agencies of our adversaries? The biggest ones being Russia and China. Look at where China is going today. They have this new social credit system, which is a really terrifying kind of surveillance system in which they've now basically assigning a score, a numerical score, to every one of their subjects. And that includes things like your allegiance to the Communist Party. Are you a troublemaker? Already they're blocking millions of Chinese citizens from being able to travel on trains and take flights. So they're restricting movement within the country. They're setting up re-education camps. Well, are we really very far behind? Look at what they've done with social media, with the tech Silicon Valley companies, Facebook and Twitter. That's become another arm of the surveillance state.
Alan, that mention of communist China and how they're using this social credit system, I know that has finally surfaced, and Google played a big part in that architecture of the software that is doing that. And isn't it true, at least I believe it's true, that was really a prototype for a worldwide system of social control through the same kind of process, where you are you're given social credits for either supporting the system or going along with it, whatever. And if you don't match that criteria, you're left on the outside, and you very well may starve.
Oh, yeah.
I think we're kind of looking into the future when we look at China and what they're doing now with social media, where they're, taking people, basically disappearing them on social media, removing their account. They're determining what is politically correct, what you can say and what you can't say. And surveillance is a big part of that. They're watching everything you do online. They're watching your Google searches. They're looking at your social media activity. And I think this is part of this bigger control grid. And if we don't get this under control, we are going to lose the country.
Yeah, I agree. If you had gone back 20 years, who would have ever dreamed that our number one trading partner in the world would be Communist China, and that most of our major big corporations would have moved much of their manufacturing, if not all of it, offshore from the United States to Communist China, who is really the number one economic power in the world, in spite of all the attempts by President Trump to bring manufacturing back to the United States. President Obama, and to a certain extent Bush and Clinton, certainly traded an awful lot of our international prestige and our industrial base away to the Chinese.
Dan, so much of our manufacturing and our jobs were offshored and outsourced. And you can't build America up to be this powerhouse, yet take the American people's jobs away. That's very important. I think it's worth noting that Eric Schmidt, Alphabet, that put in place the system in China that helped them to build that, was helping with Hillary Clinton's campaign. That's very important to understand, that these same people who are willing to put, how many people in China into a prison of sorts where they don't have a voice, you don't get a job, you don't get to travel, that the same man was working, Eric Schmidt, the same man was working with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, absolutely. Expand a little bit on some of these connections between Hillary Clinton, the Clinton campaign, and how those same connections became part of this, let's say, a deep state, surveillance state network.
Well, I think one of the really important things to remember is that Hillary Clinton had her private, illegal email system. Now, we know that Barack Obama was communicating with her on it because Uma Abedin said, "Oh, that's Barack Obama. I didn't know that was the fake name, his cover name." So understand that these people were bypassing the legal system where you must use government. If you're a government employee and you're working for the government, particularly the Secretary of State and the President, among others, you have to use that system because everything is logged and preserved. These two decided to bypass that system. What came out and what has come forth thus far, thanks to Anthony Weiner, the creeper that's married to Uma Abedin, because he had a system where his computer, his laptop was grabbing all the information off of Uma's BlackBerry, their illegal BlackBerries. They synced, so he was getting that information. That information then proved, regardless of what James Comey said, that information proved that Hillary had SAP. Now that is above top secret. People need to remember that. That is above top secret. Only very few generals have access to that information. They must go in a special room, a SCIF. They must be patted down. They must make sure they have no pen, no paper, no phone, nothing on them when they go to view that SAP information, that above top secret. Now, understand that Hillary's system had this SAP in it. SAP is two things. It is live intel, who they are, where they're located, and where our missile silos are. Okay? Understanding that, understand that Hillary Clinton's information was not just going to her and to her private server, it was also going to Manassas, Virginia, which we found was to Chinese military intelligence. Understanding all those pieces of that, now understand that within 1 year of Hillary Clinton being in power as a Secretary of State, within 1 year, every CIA agent that we had in China was dead. Every one of them was killed.
And not a word, I'm sorry, but not a word as far as explaining that to the American people, that that sort of treasonous act had resulted in the loss of life that it did, and not a word to the American people.
The Rosenbergs had nothing on Hillary Clinton. The idea that she is still out blathering all over the airwaves is outrageous. It is truly correct to lock her up. This woman, first of all, remember her connections working with all of our adversaries over time. You know, Russia reset. You know, we're going to do this, and we're giving you our uranium so that we don't have the amount of uranium, which we're already short on, this national security asset. You know, we don't have enough, but we're going to make sure that you take over 22% of it. You know, then she's transferring the top security, SAP. Do you know when we first wrote of SAP, how many colonels and generals had never even heard of SAP? It's so top secret that unless you were read in on it, unless you were at the very top of the food chain, you didn't even know that SAP existed. Think of that. And she's sending it off to our adversaries, that it was going to Manassas, to Chinese intelligence. I don't even know why somebody hasn't sent out someone to lock her up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it should have happened. It should have happened years ago, but it certainly should be part of the mainstream media. They ought to be reporting on this kind of activity. Obviously, they're controlled by the same people who control the left. They're bought and paid for by people like George Soros.
Well, I don't think people understand, and surely we did not until doing all this work, this investigation, that the deep state is in fact communist. The deep state is communist. And that Hillary Clinton has been able to get away with this. And you have to go back in time. Understand, you know, we wrote a piece on the shady Watergate reporters. Understanding that Carl Bernstein's parents, okay, Carl Bernstein, you know, Mr. Watergate reporter for the Washington Post, the same man who's sitting there barking about Donald Trump being a traitor, being insane, or all the other ludicrous things that he barks out of his mouth. Carl Bernstein's parents were working with the Rosenbergs that were put to death for stealing our nuclear secrets and giving them to the Soviets. So here's Carl Bernstein as Watergate. They knew his communist. He said he was proud of what his parents did in his book Loyalties, you know, a son's remembrance of his parents. However, after that book came out, Martin Sobel, who had been one of their collaborators, came out of Alcatraz after 30-some-odd years and told that, yeah, they had done that, and that he was glad, and they did a whole lot more. So when the Washington Post hired Carl Bernstein, they knew his background. They knew it very well. And it's important to understand that the Meyer family that owned the Washington Post, Agnes Meyer, was Saul Alinsky's patron. She was the woman who was supporting him. The family that owns the Washington Post. that part of that family was a man named Cord Meyer. He was the man who put in place, he was a CIA agent who was involved in bringing Mockingbird. And Mockingbird is when the mainstream media just keeps repeating the same lie, the propaganda to brainwash the American people. So Carl Bernstein was part of that. That's part of what he was taking down Nixon for. The reason Nixon was being taken down is because Nixon was working with Whittaker Chambers, who had flipped and was no longer a Soviet agent, and exposed Alger Hiss. He was exposing Alger Hiss, and he had the documents to prove it. And how did he do that? Whittaker Chambers had all the documents of these Soviet spies, and he kept them hidden in a pumpkin on his farm. They were known as the Pumpkin Papers. He gave those to Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon could prove who many of the communist Soviet spies in our government were, and that Alger Hiss was one of them. Alger Hiss then was put on trial, and he was sent to prison for 4 years. Not until the Venona and secrets were decrypted, and we knew the full truth of it, that Alger Hiss was much worse and received a hero's welcome in the Soviet Union when he went back to Moscow. So Richard Nixon was taking down the communists inside our government, which is why it was so important for them to take Richard Nixon down, Carl Bernstein's communist parents, Red Diaper Baby, and Bob Woodward had been intel for the Navy and was working for Henry Kissinger. So,
isn't that amazing? Mary, we got a break coming up. I absolutely want you to run with this, but let's pick it up on the other side. Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and today I have two very, very special people on my radio program, two special guests, and that is Mary Fanning and Alan Jones. And Mary, I love to hear all the connections that you have. I mean, you have more knowledge in your mind than just about anybody I've ever run across, and you connect the dots in a way that so few people have the ability to do. And so you were running on an idea here about how the deep state operates and how it is controlled by communists. I want to mention to our listeners that if you don't remember the name Alger Hiss, he led the Dumbarton Oaks Conference where they actually came up with a plan for the United Nations, at least from the American perspective, and there were a number of communists that were in that group, and Alger Hiss was actually the first Secretary General of the UN after it was formed, and he was really kind of deposed under the when it became obvious and became fact that he was connected with the Soviet Union. And the UN organization from day one was designed to move the United States out of a constitutional republic and to meld us with the Soviet communist culture in a way that we could become a new world order or a one world government. And you're just alluding to how Alger Hiss was part of that whole program. Anyway, I'm going to let you run with that.
Yeah, Alger Hiss was a big part of that, but once Whittaker Chambers turned over the Pumpkin Papers, Nixon knew what was actually taking place, and the communists inside the government. Now remember, they had been there for a very long time, coming in under World War II, many under refugee resettlement, and the man that was running the refugee resettlement was Tim Sobey, who was a Soviet spy. It's important to understand that Nixon then is working with Whittaker Chambers to expose Alger Hiss, and Nixon then brings in Joseph McCarthy. And Joseph McCarthy was right. It's not McCarthyism. Joseph McCarthy was telling the truth. Unfortunately, you know, it's exactly as they're doing right now to Donald Trump. Oh, Donald Trump is the Russian collusion spy. Donald Trump is spying. No, the only ones that were spying were these people who work for the deep state. Dan, let me take us back to Dennis Montgomery and the camera, because there's a timeline. Donald Trump tweets on March 4th, 2017, that he believes he is being wiretapped. The Mockingbird media comes forward and says, no, he's crazy. He's out of his mind. Nobody's wiretapping him. We knew about the whistleblower tapes, and we wrote about that on March 5th, 2017, the day after Trump came out with that. Some said it was fantastical, but we knew better because we've been studying the issue for a long time. So we published the whistleblower tape and showed, because we also had the audio tape from Judge D. Murray Snow, the information went viral on YouTube, 4chan, 8chan. People made their own channels with the information. It also went viral at the Donald on Reddit. Shortly after that, we had sent that story to Admiral James H. Lyons. James Lyons had the largest command under him, 4-star admiral. He also shared it with General Thomas McInerney. Tom McInerney and H. Lyons went to Operation Freedom Terrestrial Radio, Dave Ganda's show, and they read our article verbatim on air. There was so much flack with people coming and threatening them. Dave Ganda had worked in D.C. at one point, an orthopedic surgeon who was working on health actually for the American people. And General McInerney, 4-star general, who was number 3 at the Pentagon in charge of our nuclear weapons, and he was outraged to see that there was a surveillance system, an illicit, Stasi-style surveillance system. So they took to the airwaves on March 19th, 2017. They read our piece. As I said, they got a lot of flack for that. That was important because when that piece came out, things started happening that were unusual to them. General McInerney lost his job at Fox for supposedly saying John McCain, that he was saying that waterboarding works, and that's why they called John McCain Songbird, because when they waterboarded him, he started, singing like a songbird. It became even more interesting when finally the Strzok and Page text started coming out. And at that point in time, we suspected that everyone that was on the Mueller Russia collusion team had something to do with the Dennis Montgomery Hammer investigation, because not only did this information come out, and we published this on March 5th, and then again after our sites were crashed on March 17th, then they came out on the airwaves on March 19th, and at the same time, on April 24th, a FISA court judge had Brennan, Clapper, and several others. The only one who did not amend his testimony was Admiral Rogers, who actually took information to Donald Trump. The others told that they had some wiretapping that they were doing under FISA that maybe wasn't legal, so they were destroying all the documents so no one else would ever use them again, of course. And those documents, no doubt, were going to be the proof positive of this wiretapping system that was then being used in concert with the IRS to go after their political enemies. Well, when the Strzok and Page text came out, we at that point published a piece, and it's known as it's an exclusive that was at Tom Digi, and it's Obama, a coup d'etat, Obama's the docs prove illegal surveillance. As I said, it's at Tom Digi and also at theamericanreport.org. What we found when the Strzok and Page text came out is that Strzok and Page, on the Sunday night that Admiral Lyons and General McInerney, two men of sterling character and reputation, who had the highest levels of trust in our government. Strzok and Page were texting each other on that Sunday night, immediately after General McInerney and Admiral Lyons came off that radio show. And they said that we're not going to respond to the whole group. The claim in Montgomery stuff in the email that Jim just sent us is utter BS. Not to say, we'll say nothing. We'll brief later. That's what they were talking about on March 19, 2017, immediately after General McInerney came off air. So they were, one surmises, paying attention to General McInerney, that he had come on air and exposed the illegal surveillance system. And they were very concerned because now what they were doing had gone out over America's airwaves by the highest, most trusted men in our military. Beyond which, within less than 30 days later, Brennan and Clapper amended their testimony to the FISA court judge because they had to amend it because they had been lying. So that brought the whistleblower tape full circle to the Russia collusion investigation led by Robert Mueller, who gave and supplied the computers for the Hammer while he was the director of the FBI. Now the special counsel, with his good buddy James Comey, say nothing, Jim says in the email, say Strzok and Page. And they're talking about Montgomery and Clayman on that Sunday night. So this goes to the understanding that the people who created the Russia collusion fiasco and spent $25 million of our taxpayer dollars to cover their rear ends were in fact working against this country every step of the way, working against the people of this country, the ones whose money they're spending on a bogus investigation. These people need to answer for their crimes.
They do. And the thing that is always comes up, it's always the most fascinating part about this, is how I call them the lamestream media, just continue to act as their defenders and cover their tracks every time we turn around. And so I guess it's a really good sale for alternative media, because the fact is most of the media in this country really is as bad as Trump says it is.
Well, think what a conflict of interest this whole special counsel investigation is, because Dennis Montgomery has come forward with a lot of details about how he came forward. Remember, it's been a very hostile environment for whistleblowers, especially under the Obama administration. So Dennis Montgomery, being a federal contractor in the intelligence community who had reportedly even access to SAP level projects, to come forward was a tremendous risk for him. Now, he did come forward and came forward to the FBI and turned over evidence to the FBI establishing that this camera system actually did exist. He turned over hard drives to the FBI that was directed by Director Comey, and James Baker was the general counsel for the FBI. So according to Montgomery, they came forward to the FBI and turned over this evidence, the physical evidence of the hard drives, to the FBI. Furthermore, Montgomery, and is represented by Clayman as his attorney, has stated that he was debriefed by the FBI extensively and was very open, never took the fifth, and told them what he knew, and that two FBI special agents, Burnett and Giordina, were the special agents who were Comey's right-hand men who were assigned to debrief Mr. Montgomery. Well, who should special counsel Mueller appoint to his special counsel investigation team? Well, he brings in the same two special agents who had debriefed Montgomery about the hammer. This is a secret program that, he came forward as a whistleblower to try to expose illegal surveillance. The FBI then buried the investigation, but not only did they bury the investigation, they brought those who were involved in the whistleblower case for Montgomery and then assigned them to Mueller's special counsel to then take down President Trump as an alleged Russian agent. That's a tremendous conflict of interest. Now, we didn't realize that Strzok and Page may have been somehow connected to the Montgomery investigation until, as Mary just explained, the text messages were emerging, and among those text messages was a text message in which Strzok and Page specifically mentioned the name Dennis Montgomery and say, that's not to say anything, we'll debrief them, we'll brief them later if necessary. That definitely shows that they were, at the very least, aware of the Montgomery program, the investigation, if not possibly more involved. That remains to be seen.
Okay, let me ask a question. What happened to the 600 million documents and all the hard drives and all this information? Why isn't that being made available to the American public?
Because they turned it over to the... Well, hold on. They turned it over to the corporate counsel for James Comey's corporate counsel, James Baker. And that's very important because, as Alan just mentioned, Barnett and Giardina, they were the ones who debriefed Montgomery. James Baker, the corporate counsel for the FBI, was fired from the FBI. He's also the one that went to David Corn and was working to put together the PP dossier, the vulgar document to smear our president with. James Comey has been fired. Then Deborah Curtis, who was the one who wrote up the immunity agreement with the counsel, James Baker. She joined the Russia collusion team under Robert Mueller. It is the same tribe of traitors that were involved in the taking the documents from Dennis Montgomery, never released them, never told the American people about them, but then that same cabal joined the Russian collusion investigation.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And do they even acknowledge that these documents exist at the FBI or the Department of Justice? Do they even acknowledge that Dennis Montgomery's documents that he brought forward even exist?
No, they do not acknowledge it, but something happened in the last week that's very interesting. Joe DeGenova has come out on the airwaves on Fox, and it's an interview with Mike Huckabee, although they did erase so many of the YouTubes that had that interview, and he talked about that they were doing illegal surveillance, and there is proof positive, and that's going to be coming forward, and it's going to expose everything that they were doing. Joe DeGenova says that, they'll be hammered. And so I believe he's referring to the hammer, and he's referring to the system that Dennis Montgomery put. And you have to remember how brave Dennis Montgomery is. The man had an aneurysm. He had a couple brain surgeries to try to correct it. It could not be corrected. The pressure that he has been put under by the Brennans and Clappers and others in our government, others in the deep state. And yet he came forward and he said, I'm exposing this. You know why? He said, this is my last stand for America. That man came forward and said, this is my last stand for America. I'm exposing what they're doing.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. I wish more Americans felt that way, and I wish more Americans were as brave and as smart as you and Alan, because I'm telling you, the work that you're doing exposes so much more than we would ever hear if it weren't for you.
I think once you understand Obama, and his connections, as you say, Dan, connecting the dots, and all your background information, the things that you know, and the Venona secrets and the encryption. And when you understand that history and this infiltration of our government, and you understand Agenda 2130, and you look at all those and you keep pulling all those threads, or the dots, as you say, as you put those together, you start to see the tapestry. And they are taking us to a Soviet America. They are taking our freedom. And I think there's a lot of people who don't agree with that. And they're not hearing it because the mainstream media is hiding it all. The Mockingbird media is just parroting garbage in, garbage out. You know, we've spoken before about Golitsyn and Yuri Bezmenov telling how brainwashed anyone under 40 is. At least those above 40 understand our history and can accept some of the information. One of the best pieces that has come out, just that we talked about it, Dan, that surprising piece that came out from General Pacepa, saying, say nothing. So here's this KGB general, Romanian general, defected, who believed in freedom and was standing up for Pius XII and Christianity. And he came forward in a piece in February 9th, I believe, at PJ Media, February 9, 2018, and he said, I should know, and I believe that Barack Obama, like Whittaker Chambers had been, is Kremlin intel. Can you imagine that this general who worked with our intelligence agency for 30 years after he defected came out and said that the U.S. president was Kremlin intel?
Yes, and this was, I believe he was either a 3 or 4-star general in the Romanian Secret Service. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. He was working with the Soviet KGB under Ceausescu. He exposed him after he defected. He's an American hero. This man is an American hero.
Well, Mary and Alan, you're American heroes, and I want to give you just a few minutes to talk about the Center for Security Policy, the Coalition for Concerned Citizens, and the America Report, because these are places where people can find out a lot more about your research and your writing.
Well, Alan and I have put together a body of work that shows what these people were putting in place. You can find us at the centerforsecurity.org. We have a new piece that will be coming out tomorrow, which is chilling. And we're looking at EMP and protecting the grid. And you know what? We're not just doing this. We're trying to help save this country, and only if the American people stand up can that happen. So you need to, look at these pieces. You can Google our names or search for them at the centerforsecuritypolicy.org or theamericanreport.org, or, our names. You'll find things at Breitbart and ComDigi and LifeSet and other places. But we need the American people to stand shoulder to shoulder with us, because they're turning over our ports to Saddam's nuclear mastermind, who was on the blacklist, a man who was wanted for capture or killed and declared enemy of the United States. Can you imagine giving that a 35-year lease to a critical infrastructure port where Air, Sea, and Space Command reside? No.
That's phenomenal. It really is. Mary, I have to say, every time you come to our show, I get a tremendous amount of feedback from our listeners, because they're fascinated with the information that you and Alan bring forward, because you bring forward stuff that nobody else is reporting anywhere else in this country. And it's so well researched, and you footnote and document everything you do. Tell our listeners maybe a little bit about what you see as I know you think the American people need to get behind this president, but what do you see as the ultimate way that we can fight back? Because we've got to fight this.
Get on the ground and start working in your state. These people will steal every election, every vote. Do you think they're running the border with all these illegals for nothing? You can't even imagine what's coming. You cannot imagine what's coming if we do not stand up and take our country back. The Democrat Communist Party of Barack Obama and Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, these people hate this country. They hate the Americans in this country. Beyond that, the people have turned against them. They have figured them out. Why do you think they need to keep importing all these people to run our borders?
Oh, you're right. Listen, Mary, Alan, thank you again. You guys are fantastic guests. I look forward to the next time. And ask our listeners, please join us again next week and help us to connect the dots. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.